The United Nations has voted on an historic first-of-its-kind treaty aimed at the international arms trade. So what does this international treaty mean for you? And what one area of the arms transfers did the UN happen to miss? Ben has the reality check you won't see anywhere else.
It's called the UN Arms Trade Treaty, or ATT. It requires countries to regulate and control the export of weapons from nation to nation. The New York Times says that the treaty, which took 7 years to negotiate, reflects growing international sentiment that the multi-billion-dollar weapons trade needs to be held to a moral standard. So here's how the vote broke down. The UN Arms Trade Treaty was passed in the UN General Assembly yesterday by a vote of 155 to 3, with 22 abstentions. The three countries voting against the treaty: Iran, Syria, and North Korea. So what exactly will this treaty do? Well, it requires countries to regulate and control the export of weaponry, such as battle tanks or combat vehicles and aircraft, attack helicopters. But as the Washington Post points out, the treaty also includes, quote, small arms and light weapons in its list of weaponry subject to international regulations. Now, one provision requires participating countries to keep records of arms exports and imports, including the quantity, the value, the model and type, and the end users as appropriate for at least 10 years. So here in the U.S., gun rights advocates are worried that will ultimately lead to the UN demanding a national firearms registry. Now, perhaps the most interesting thing about this issue is simply this: groups claiming that the treaty will protect innocent people from around the world from arms sales. People like Anna McDonald, the head of arms control of Oxfam International. She says the Syrian civil war, where reportedly 70,000 people have been killed, that by regulating gun sales from the Russians to the Syrian government, well, that would have saved lives. The problem with that argument is that this treaty manages to ignore at least one form of arms trade: governments selling weapons to non-state groups. A scenario that is playing out in Syria right now as the Saudis, Qatar, Turkey, and the U.S. helping to fund and to get weapons to al-Qaeda-led groups in the Free Syrian Army. Exactly the reason that Syria says they voted against the treaty. Syria's Bashar Jafari said that his country opposed the way this treaty was drafted because, quote, some of the countries behind the draft treaty, he said, were fully engaged in supplying terrorist groups in Syria with all kinds of lethal weapons. So what this means for you is that even though the Obama administration is backing the treaty, in order for the United States to ratify it, well, that has to be done by the U.S. Senate. In fact, in the Senate, it takes 2/3 of 100 lawmakers to win ratification. Right now, all Republican senators and at least one Democrat have vowed to stand against it, which means as it stands, unless something dramatic happens, this treaty has no chance of ratification here in the U.S. And that is Reality Check.
You can find the sources for this story posted on our website, fox19.com. If you'd like to make your voice heard, head over to Ben's Facebook page. You can find it by searching Ben Swan.